Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to call the meeting of the East Lansing City Charter Review Committee to order for the January 9th, 2025. Asia, if you would please call the roll.
Diane Gutierrez,
Present.
Jeffrey Hayes,
Present.
Jonathan Foreman, Dr. Ruben Martinez,
Present.
Bill Rhodey, here, Pam Weil,
Here.
Dr. Veronica Wilson Johnson,
Present.
Dale Rudolph, Lynn Richardson.
Here. Okay, if I can have a motion to approve the agenda as presented. I approve the agenda. Moved by Dr. Wilkerson Johnson and supported by Dr. Martinez. Any changes? Not all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. The agenda is approved. Now we'll move on to the minutes. And that was a very full meeting last time. Anybody, I'll move approval of the minutes. Is there anybody else that would like the second? Or moved by Gudera, supported by Wilkerson Johnson. Any changes or corrections? Not all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. The minutes are approved. So now we'll go to written communication. You have the communication packet, which is posted online. There was one communication and email, and it spoke to House Bill 5700, but that attachment wasn't there. So I had Asia print that off so you have that. And that'll be on our agenda. We're going to follow up and make sure if it passed both the Senate and the House to see if we have to go back and look at 3.3 and 4.4. So that'll be on the agenda next time, just to make sure that we covered that. And how about any communications from the audience? Any none? Communications from city committee members. I know there were some emails going back and forth yesterday, and I saw and I heard about some today. I know Mr. Chubb put out there to remember that the discussion needs to take place here. We'll have to put those emails in the packet for next time, but everybody might not have been aware that there's communications because some came today. So whatever you said, bring it up at the meeting today. That would be helpful for the whole committee. And a reminder, as Mr. Chubb said, communication should be at the table. Anything else?
People know, Councilman Romero said he was going to bring up to city council the process of reviewing the ordinances every 10 years. I didn't see it on the agenda. I didn't watch the council.
I think it's going on a discussion agenda. I'm not sure if it's next week or if it'll be next month, but I think they wanted to put that on discussion.
All right, we'll move on to new business. This was after every public comment meeting, where we set aside a meeting just for the public come aware, comments on anything we've been doing or going to do. We had no comments at the last meeting. So there was no proposals from the community members or public comment. So we can go right on to 3.3 and look at the city charter chapter 10. And it's my understanding we have with us from the finance department, Owen, why don't you introduce yourself? Allison. Tell us how long you work for the city.
I'm gonna read off a statement, if you don't mind. I'm not the best public speaker in the world. I've been with the city for 3.5 months here. I'm Owen Valley, I'm a budget and accounting analyst in the finance department. I'm here on behalf of the finance director, who unfortunately is traveling tonight and could not be here. I'd like to just start off with thanking all of you for your service to the residents of East Lansing and as members of this committee. It certainly seems like it is a significant commitment, and I respect your willingness to participate in these late night sessions. The finance department has a few changes to chapter 10 of the city charter that we would like to propose to the committee. Does everybody have chapter 10? Like, if it's available, it's part of it.
Sure. It's better than one copy.
Okay, cool.
I think the green means better.
Is this better?
You like our copy, 10?
No, I don't need one. Just might reference some of the sections within that. So I just wanted to make sure. Is this working? Should I just speak up a little bit?
Yeah, just speak up.
Okay.
You have to be really close to it for it to work.
Okay, let's try it. Okay, so we just had a couple recommendations to modify the language in chapter 10. The first recommendation from finance would be a potential change in section 10.2 budget procedure. We would recommend a modification just to the language in the last sentence that mandates submission of a complete itemized budget by the first regular meeting of the city council in April. We feel like this language is a little bit restrictive, as depending on when meetings are scheduled, there can be almost 2 full months between when the budget document is prepared and when it is actually adopted. So this can cause undue pressure on departments to complete their budgets to meet the deadline, when potentially a later date would provide some departmental relief while still providing sufficient time for council to discuss departmental requests. We would propose 3 alternatives to that deadline. Go over each of those kind of one by one. Alternative 1 is the charter could potentially propose that the city manager adopt a budget process calendar annually. This calendar would lay out deadlines for budget submission to council and budget adoption by council. This would allow flexibility each year while still having the benefit of certainty ahead of time. We would suggest potentially establishing this calendar at least 7 months prior to the beginning of the subsequent fiscal year, or even allowing the city manager discretion in the timing of the submission of this calendar. Another alternative that we would have to that language is the last sentence could simply be modified to read no later than the second regular meeting or first discussion only meeting, or no later than April 15th. So that's kind of keeping it along the same lines, but just making some slighter modifications. And finally, our third alternative that we would propose is the charter could just read at such time as may be fixed by the city manager. This broader language would allow flexibility long-term, and it's language that I kind of saw as I was looking at different city charters over the course of the day. So that was kind of our first proposal for potential modification.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So April 15th is the hard date.
That would be a modification. One of the proposed changes would be changing it to April 15th. Right now, it says that the first regular city council meeting in April is the hard date for submission.
So this is all because the city council dates fluctuate.
Yeah, yes.
So that's
So
the impetus. And it really does need to be submitted by the 15th.
there's no statutory requirement that it has to be submitted to the city council for review by April 15th. Really, the only requirement from the state of Michigan is that it has to be adopted by the beginning of the next fiscal year. So the review is just to make sure that city council has enough time to properly look through all the departmental requests, as well as give departments time to answer any questions and receive feedback.
A lot of monitors. And just for some context on that, just as Owen referenced, last year, I can't remember the exact date of the first meeting in April, but it was within the first couple of days. And so it didn't really put a burden on the city, and we weren't, and on finance rather, we weren't actually able to have it in place that's required by the charter. And so that finite date would just, make sure that it's still done in an appropriate time, but not in a, whim of when city council meetings are scheduled.
Any other questions about that potential?
Of the three alternatives, is there one that's preferred by finance department?
I can speak to what I would prefer and which proposal was mine, but honestly, I can't speak to exactly like what the finance director would recommend. I can just tell you that the alternative number one was recommended by Robert, because that was Robert Bellman, the city manager, because that was what he had experienced when he was working in the county before, is they would establish a calendar earlier in the fiscal year, and that would kind of set the goalposts or the deadlines. And that was a little bit flexible. And then we, within finance, we came up with alternatives number 2 and alternative number 3. Alternative number 2 is probably the least significant change. It's simply kind of pushing the deadline back a little bit. And then alternative number 3 kind of allows for flexibility within the finance department, while still kind of operating under the assumption that the city manager is working closely in concert with the city council, and that they have a good working relationship, and that he understands what they need in order to have enough time to review.
You can't have to think this ties in, because we did the work on the more flexibility in terms of setting the dates for the council meetings, right? And the swearing in and that sort of thing. Mightn't this be part of a yearly calendar that once the meetings are established, then this is established based on that year's meeting schedule? So it will all kind of roll out of the council schedule.
Absolutely. That's one of the first things we do once the new calendar year meetings are established, is that we get to work on setting all the budget deadlines and the budget dates.
So do you have some more on here, or is that the only thing that were here?
But we had a couple other potential
Okay,
modifications.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, submission by April is not a problem, it's just a fluctuation of the city council meetings.
Yes, the I guess way you could put it is kind of Tony had referenced, is it can, depending on when that first April meeting falls within April, it can just cause some pressure.
So am I right to interpret it that a more definite, that what you're seeking here is a more definite date as opposed to just a fluctuating date, right?
So
No.
he wants a fluctuating date that's related to the schedule of the council.
It-
So the second was the April 15th. The April 15th is a more definite date that allows your department to plan out your year to be more consistent across every year, right?
Yes, generally speaking, can I reread alternative number 2 just to make sure we're all
Please,
on the
yes.
same page there? So alternative number 2 was the last sentence could be modified to read no later than the second regular meeting or first discussion only meeting, or no later than April 15th. Something along those lines.
So you would want all three of those. Your ask of us to all three of those. So include the,
Yes.
When this is done, can you email this, Eddie, so we can just read? Put
Yeah.
together too?
Okay, so typically, when Mr. Bellman put 7 months before the next fiscal year begins. So if you go back to that, there's 6 months, and that would be December. So in December, they set the dates for the next city council meetings. It's after the elections, that, in the years that they're elections, so they know that who's going to be on council, so that they can set their schedules up. And then if you're using alternative 1, they're setting it up in December, and they're looking at whether the holidays, I'll tell you that all goes into it with spring break, kind got a lot of staff that might have children in schools and stuff, and they might go on spring break, or faculty at MSU, which usually have a different spring break. So all that goes into how they set this. And so when you pick that hard and fast date, April 15th, I keep thinking, okay, that could be in the middle of a spring break. No, when you're doing that and wanting you to have flexibility so that everyone's who's working in the department is got some freedom to put their 2 cents in here and not be tied to something. So that was my gut feeling on this, because you really do want the council to know there's going to be a meeting, and then we want you and your department to have the flexibility to know what you can and can't do to get and set that up. And number 3 is just a little that might be fixed by the city manager. Number 1 tells us the city, the community tells us that this is going to be what the budget process is going to be, so that people can plan, because there's the community development block grant programs that have hearings. There's, neighborhoods that are looking for money for some projects and things. So when I hear this, I think I want flexibility for that department, but I want to make sure that everybody's got their schedule planned well in advance so that they know that, rather than what you were saying was hard and fast. So this gives flexibility, but it doesn't give that hard and fast date. That seems to be right in the middle of that.
But it gives ample time for review. And that's why I asked about the April 15th or not, because to give a date, because there can be a technique where you push, you don't get the information. Mr. Hayes. In time to read it. So that's the classic. We get a bill, you don't have time to review it fully, or we have to vote on it. So we want to make sure that this is, like you said, like maybe the 15th, but there's enough ample time to review the proposed budget.
Can you reread number 1 again?
Sure. Okay. Alternative number 1, the charter could propose that the city manager adopt a budget process calendar annually. This calendar would lay out deadlines for budget submission to council and budget adoption by council. This would allow for flexibility each year while still having the benefit of certainty ahead of time. We would suggest establishing this calendar at least 7 months prior to the beginning of the next fiscal year, or allowing the city manager discretion in the timing of the submission of this calendar.
Well, I've told you before, I've worked for municipalities. 2 of them I was in charge of budgeting, and both of them was similar to that. That every year, long prior to the end of the fiscal year, come up with a calendar, then you can work on when Easter is, everything else, work it through, and it gives everybody, when your deadline is.
And was it 7 months? He said 7 months, which is in December. But now I'm so paranoid about this House bill that we're going to check to see if it passed the Senate, because this came from the city clerk.
State website.
It did not. So our language is okay, which said,
As of now. But it's still out there.
Well, it's a new session, right? So
Yeah.
it's not supposed to-
Yeah, I just don't know if there's carryover. Yeah.
so would 6 months make more sense? Because that would get us through December and January. That's the schedule will be out. So it'd be like the last meeting in December instead of the next year. Does that make more sense?
In terms of the date for the setting of the calendar.
Yes, and all that. Okay. All right. Anybody else on this one that Owen has? And you're doing fine public speaking. It's not written down, you're answering questions.
I have a quick question. So April 15th is just deadline. It can be done anytime before that. And it seems to me that city managers would have to provide a calendar anyway.
He does.
And it does so, right?
Yes. And again, if you watch any of these city council meetings, when they're trying to figure out the calendar, when they can meet to have all the budget sessions, they've been meeting sometimes early before the regular city council meetings. Sometimes they meet on the weekends. They have to work on everybody's schedule. just having that whole discussion and watching that take place at the council meetings is painful at times. I think the 6 months they work, they get the schedule and they work backwards from that. But the new city council members, coming in, I would bet 100%. I guess I'll say 100%. I would bet any amount of money up to $1. That they have no idea about all the meetings in the budget process before they get on council. And when they get on council, I think they're just astounded at how many. Would you agree, Asia? That nobody knows how many. Yeah, you would agree too, huh?
I think we don't have to go to them, but I am aware of that.
So that gives them a chance to organize their life too, so. Okay. Next.
All right, our next proposal is kind of along the same lines. The next section we would propose a change to is section 10.5. Currently, 10.5 reads not later than the last regular meeting of the city council in May. This is a month earlier than required by the state of Michigan. We would suggest allowing for later adoption, possibly language along the lines of at such time and place as the council may direct. Again, that language was just some sample language that I reviewed in other city charters. But the idea is that we will ensure that the budget is adopted by the deadline, which would always be the last meeting in June for the city. But this way it just gets rid of some potentially restrictive language in the charter that might not necessarily be serving a purpose, and it might be more detrimental than it is beneficial.
Could you envision that when they set the calendar for the budget process, that date would be then 6 months before, be well known?
Of adoption, yes.
And just for perspective, all of the communities that I worked in, when I came to East Lansing, I was very surprised by the state. It's very early, and you could speak more to it, Joe.
Everywhere I worked, it was at least a month before.
A
So
month
no,
before.
I'm used to. This is what I'm used to.
Well, a month before would be June 1.
And it's the end of May.
Yeah,
But
Well, the last, yeah, and I guess that could fluctuate a little bit. I mean, every day.
Yeah.
so what goes on between the adoption? What did you have something to do with those 30 days? Was that a buffer important?
you needed to load everything, the budget and the software. I mean, make sure everything was ready to go at the beginning of the year. Anything that needed, contracts, where there was you had to have time. So I was always used to a month early, but if they say they don't need that time, it's different. But I just was not shocked by this.
So are there fewer steps then once the council approves it? There's fewer steps for you in terms of implementation?
There certainly are still steps involved in implementation. I think maybe what this change would help with is, say there was a council meeting earlier in June, like the first 2 weeks of June, and that was a council meeting that the city identified they wanted to use as the adoption date for the budget resolution. This language, with the alternative language, would just provide some flexibility to allow that, as opposed to the language that it is in there currently, which says it always has to be by the end of May. And so again, it's just restricted.
My other comment would be, did you talk to the assessor about that? Because the taxes and levy, does that give them time to get it on the bills to go out on July 1st? I mean, that's another consideration that I think needs to be done. If you don't adopt the budget and come up with a millage until June 15th, how are bills going to go out July 1st? So that would be
Okay.
Just the thing I would check on.
Have you, Jill, have you seen other communities that have a set a distinction in the dates between establishing the mill rates versus the adoption of the budget?
No.
I don't know how you would do that exactly, but I've seen that happen, not in the normal course of business, but it's curious.
But, I've seen that by May 31st. Because the last meeting in May could be the 18th. So I mean, look at May's growth. May need to be adjusted.
Well, might the calendar look at scheduling, but it would have to be a standard meeting of the council. Or could they add another one for May?
Well, this is,
Certainly have a special meeting.
yeah, this was done in 97. They did some amendments to this. Back in 97, they had a set, their calendar was the first and third were the meetings of council, and the second and fourth were the discussion meetings. So the first one could actually, if you put it in, if you had May 31st was the Memorial Day, the first meeting would be the day after Memorial Day for council, because that was it. They didn't alter that. The only time they did is they skipped meetings in July. That they gave them a longer period of time, like there were only 2 meetings in July rather than 4 meetings. And it was to give some vacation time, and sometimes they'd skip one in August, but they were very strict on that schedule. It's only recently when they started first they changed to have no discussion meetings. They just had regular meetings, and it was according to everyone's schedule. And then they added some discussion meetings, but they weren't as defined as what they were before. So having something in this with some dates certain is really good, just because everything's, for the community looking at this, they know there's hard and fast, they know when it's going to happen. So I think if we have some flexibility, so, if you can have your meeting before Memorial Day, but it's, 29th or something like that. Not that, which if it was the fourth Tuesday, that would give you some more flexibility than what this does, just, not more flexibility, without going to June and saying you've got a whole extra months to do it. And in this community where there's vacations and school that's out, community leaves.
Beyond asking for flexibility, what is the problem that's being addressed?
My understanding, again, I've been here for 3.5 months, but the budget process, at least in previous fiscal years, departments can run into some crunch around the time that budgets are due, both after the review step where city council is asking questions and requesting answers, and just prior to the budget adoption step. And I think someone else might have potentially spoke to that idea of things might get rushed through the process a little bit if the deadlines are too early. Like if they're artificially early deadlines, then that might rush the process and lead to a less impactful, less effective budget.
My experience is if you move the date, you just move the crunch.
Yeah.
I don't get the solution here.
Well, we'll have some discussion on this.
And these are just proposals. They're just making some proposals
fine.
from the finance.
Not shooting the messenger.
So in the language you're proposing, we would take out the designation of a month. For instance, we would take May away, and it would say something like, at such time and place as council decides. But does that mean that we don't meet, for instance, by a certain time in June? Or we just take a month out altogether and just leave it to the discretion of council? Is that what we're saying?
Yes, with the understanding that the state of Michigan mandates that it's adopt like the very last day is July 1st. And then, of course, there would be other potential considerations such as the tax millage.
Well, July 1st is the date it started. Fiscal year.
Yes.
But we don't have to. Maybe we suggest the first meeting.
This says it's a joint.
Which section are you?
Still in there.
10-5.
The levy is part of the resolution.
Oh, gotcha.
Okay, so it sounds like we probably, on Jill's comment too, we talk about 10.5, we should check with the assessor and see. Not
We should
necessarily
check, yeah.
if that's a problem, to make sure that that wouldn't be an issue.
But I think check with the or propose. So if we, like with the assessor, we said the first meeting in June, but if we say, we don't know when it's gonna be, it could be anytime. Yeah, it's sort of like, what are we asking him if he needs 30 days or
Does he
they
need
need
time?
Yeah.
To look
Okay,
at
time.
the levies, get the things ready, right? Okay, so. All right, ready? So we got 10.2, 10.5, and your next one is,
Last one. Finally, finance would recommend a change to section 10.9. This section mandates an annual report be published within 90 days after the close of the fiscal year, while the audit is available within 180 days of the close of the fiscal year. We simply recommend merging these deadlines so that the annual report will always have the most accurate audited information. So simply saying the annual report and the audit would be available within 180 days of the close of the fiscal year. And I guess the risk there would just be the annual report gets published and then numbers change over the course of the audit.
The 180 is. Correct. You just want to get rid of that last sentence.
you want to put 180 in there instead of 90.
Oh, okay.
Oh, but then what for the second one?
So
Yeah.
you would say within 180 days after the close of the fiscal year?
Correct. Yeah, basically, there's a section that says 180 days for the audit. And then we would just want to have that say 180 days for the audit and the annual report, instead of having them have two separate deadlines.
And that for all of us is usually comes in it's been going out as part of the calendar that the city puts out. That's pertinent facts concerning activities and finances. And it said by changing that to 180, it could be sooner so they could print it and publish it, but
Yes, yeah.
So we've got the initial report that you do within 180 days. And then that report is audited. And then after that, there's the general public publication of the audited report. Is that process?
There's an annual report that gets sent out. That's within 90 days of the end. And then there's a second report that is audited, and that is obviously audited by an external accounting firm. That is called the Annual Comprehensive Financial Report. So it's a little confusing because they have similar names. But that report is that ACFR, or Annual Comprehensive Financial Report, that's due within 180 days, is probably more what people would think of as published financial statements more commonly.
And are they available to the general public or just the audited?
Yeah.
such as one. Thank you.
Thank
did
you.
a Women's job. Women's job.
No one's checked.
For being in your short time. Welcome to the city too. Okay, so I want to ask Jill, do you have any concerns about that at all?
only that, we'll go out earlier, it's in the calendar, we can't wait till January, to
Right.
fill out the calendar.
Giving them a little more flexibility.
Yes, and these are the maximum dates, right? If it's completed earlier, then it can be published earlier. These are the certain dates.
All right, so let's go back to the beginning of chapter 10, and just, we've heard what the finance department has offered us. To be perfectly honest with you, I feel like our expert here is the person that should guide us on this. If there was anything that stood out to you, we've been on the other side, we've just been looking on the side.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I haven't got a chance to do, but I plan on doing is looking at what it looks like on our website in terms of verbiage. Is this the same language? Are we calling things? Can I track the process here with output that we see in the council? Get out minutes and stuff, because sometimes they call, like he said, we call these reports these things. Council may call them these things, and does this overlay the activities?
You'll see,
Language.
you'll see the budget document put up on the website.
Yeah,
That's the
no,
way it's
and the
proposed.
but I'm talking about the names, because we refer to things in the charter, is that the same way we're referring to them in the city meetings and things? So that's just what I'm just planning on walking through and seeing if it makes sense from an outsider. If I was a citizen saying, oh, I want to follow the budget process, but could I look at the website and put it in line with what we're doing with the charter and that sort of thing?
So the budget process will be in, all those meetings will be a detailed minutes, detailed, every question and answer is listed in that for each year. So it'll be different each year, but you'll find that all through the budget process through the meetings. The actual budget document that was proposed is put up there, and then the one that they're working from is up there, and then the budget that's adopted at the end of May or first week of June, whenever we're going to decide. That one is also then put on the website as well. And within the budget document that goes out to everybody, there's different tabs in there that that tell you so much more about the city stuff. So I don't think that when I look at this, I could tell you where I know where each of those things are after seeing 9 budgets. So
It aligns as far as you're concerned with what the
I
process
didn't
is.
see anything that, I just don't have a part in putting it together except in terms of putting it to meet these deadlines and stuff. That was also by the city manager and the finance department. So I would want to know that the finance department, I think it's great that we brought that forward to say what works too. And granted, our finance department is pretty new in the city now too. It's not, we don't have long-term employees there anymore. So it's fresh eyes looking at it, which is good.
What's been the practice? This cycle always get done at the last minute to meet the deadline for like 10/4, at least 1 week in advance. But do they ever actually put it out there 2 weeks in advance for the public can actually review it? Do they do it at the last minute?
I think it's my experience, it's typically not at the last minute. It's only if there's extenuating circumstances. It's trying to, whether it's staffing or, like during ARPA, for example, I know there was some uncertainty about revenue. And so we were holding off to see what numbers would be, things like that.
You can't see the drafts as you're moving through it. So you can get a good look at what's happening even if it's not fully officially published. It doesn't come out of nowhere.
And definitely they certainly have. Yeah.
Budget meetings started in February generally. And
I wasn't involved in this Lansing's budget. So when you guys keep looking at me, that's why I have no idea what the answer is.
Now that's where Sean legal references is the lawyers and accountants.
But when the meeting started and
they started in February where they go through everything. And then each department comes to the council and goes through their whole budget, what they use for. And, we you have the staff, the finance staff that put together the document based on input from all the departments. What ends up happening with that budget is sometimes money is moved here or there, but the core of the budget when you start is there and always available for the public. And as you get towards May, then they show the changes that have happened and where they've shifted some money. And they talk about that, but they talk about that budget a lot during this past months. They have the hearing and then they adopted at a separate meeting, if I remember correctly. Come to it at the same meeting. Because they give a chance to go back and revise.
And listen to input of the
Yes.
public to see if it should change it, yeah.
Right, 10-4 talks about the public hearing and you have to wait.
On 10-4, and this is also another place where it talks about it just being available in the office of the clerk. So maybe this fits into the other version we're talking about. Somewhere. I also just wonder, is such an important thing, should it be available more than 1 week for the public to look at?
Well, because all of the meeting agendas and documents will be available to the public as well. So if you want to follow the budget process, you can see the attachments, right, as we go through it, and those will all be there.
But how does the public know that?
They read the chart for every,
So it seems like most people look for the actual budget doc, not gonna parse through all these different things. You know, you're gonna look for, where's the report?
but we have our trained reference, like we're going to be able to correct it.
The budget, I have one other, I guess, just issue, maybe this fits in some of these other upcoming sections, but, this fits into the same sort of vein. So like, for example, whatever, a year or two ago when the city was looked at the affordable housing project over there at Albert Avenue, there was no financial analysis done of the tax consequences for the city. Until Robert told Clinton Dempsey, I asked for one. And it was giving the city council the day of the public. So I'm just curious about that sort of thing. 'Cause how could you factor in something? Maybe that's not factored, like it is next year or something, but I thought that was just strange. Poor practice, poor bad governance too, that there was no, we can say, you know, we're short staffed, man, there may be reasons for them, but generally I would think the city's doing a major project that has a financial impact on the city, tax subsidies. They were not paying so much tax revenue, that impacts the city finances. So I'd like to see somewhere in here that sort of stuff, and that's a mandatory thing, that if it has a major financial impact on the city, there's analysis report done, and that is available to the public with enough time to review it. I don't know if a week is enough time to review it. So that was just one example that happened a year or two ago. I could pull an email for that sort of one. I called the city assessor, I called the finance department. I think I called somebody else.
Wouldn't that be part of the development?
Well, I called I never got a call back from Dempsey, but I talked to David Lee, the assessor, was very helpful. Everyone sort of was putting it off on someone else should do something sort of thing. And then Robert was like, directed him to do it, he did it in a day, but it was like a 1 or 2 page memo. Clearly not comprehensive enough for the sort of financial impact that it had. So, I mean, I'm just bringing that up because it's like,
Right, and that's,
to see stuff put out there for people. I mean, even like council, if I was on council, I'd want to have a report. I want to be able to read it. I want to be able to give it to someone else that knows more about the topics. What do you think? of this? You know, right? And we just finished, okay, 1 second. And to have that available with enough time for everybody to see it. Maybe that fits in this section or somewhere else. Does that make sense?
I would just say, this is the budget, which is the guiding, like, sort of like the charters, the constitution, the budget is just our key document. I think what you're talking about is the most effective way to do that is to have it as an ordinance than anything. Because you can talk about that in a different way than you're talking about the budget. Because that's a more specific to specific projects, whether they're projects that are going to have TIF funds, whether they're going to be projects that are totally financed by the city. That would all be laid out in an ordinance, and that should be something, I mean, that would be something we can mention to Mark, that you want to have an ordinance that tells people that we've done our work on it, our research, we've got the data there, and it's going to be available to the public too, not just to council.
yeah, and it's gonna be a 10-year projection. That's operations, infrastructure, maintenance. So that's what I'd like to see, where the budget includes an extent, maybe like with you, this idea, it doesn't belong in this, these are the steps in the budget, but to say any asset or whatever, or change has a 10-year timeline. Like, what will it cost us every year? What's the replacement cost? We'll be setting money aside to replace it. You know, because I know on the parks board, we just kept getting caught with a rotten roof. I'm like, that rotten roof didn't come out of nowhere. We should have been seeing that in the budget every year. This roof needs, you know what I mean? That should be part, maintenance and operations should be part of what we're voting on every year. You know, if we choose to waive working on the roof, we should be clearly choosing not to spend money on the roof. You know, instead it just doesn't.
Well, they have a capital improvements.
Yeah.
Oh, sure, we have capital improvements of things we're choosing to spend the money on, but we didn't have like the capital inventory of the ages of our buildings, you know.
So let me ask you, going back to Michael, so like if the project were to come up mid-year to, city council that involves some sort of, you know, tax incentives that would affect the revenue of the city, is that factored into the next year's budget? Okay, so that's just all perspective.
Because they don't have
They
it.
don't have it, I guess, yeah, okay.
And then because they go out to bid and all of that stuff, it.
No, because then it becomes real, so you know,
Yeah.
but then knowing you're gonna have to replace a roof or do a software update that you need to be saving for, that, you know, something that, you know, these ongoing operations and maintenance, it's no respect.
And to that note, I would say, that has been a problem for years and years, especially with that. And it became clear when we did the, Northern Tier Trail and the aquatic center, that was the beginning when people started talking about that, but they didn't apply it across to the library. You know, we've done some stuff with Hannah because we've had a bond with that. But as far as, you're talking about the technology stuff, that has never been factored in, and that seems to be a budget comment each time. Should we invest in an upgrade this year? Oh, we'll put it off because we need to use the money for this. And then you get so far behind, and that's just something that technology has advanced so much in recent years. We haven't had somebody who's said, you got to start to plan for this.
Like
It's been a
the
leader.
buildings, the parks buildings had the same, I had the same experience with physical parks buildings. So it is like, and when you buy something, you gotta say, how are we gonna be able to maintain this? What's it gonna cost to maintain? Do we have to repaint this every year? You know, like, so what is the actual impact of the budget for the next 10 years or however long of this position or change?
Again, that's the capital improvements program, that they put all that stuff in there, and then they readjust it and move it depending on where they need the dollars.
Gotcha. A couple of things. You're talking about expenditures and you're talking about revenue.
Yeah.
But
Both of the budget, but yeah.
do you have to make a list of other recommendations you wanted to make?
Yeah. Put it on the
Maybe that
board,
goes on
yeah.
there.
Put it on the board.
Resolution about that.
Yeah, it seemed like we had a list to put together.
Yeah, that's it.
Things that weren't in the charter we wanted to recommend.
Okay,
I prefer to see something in the charter saying that there's gotta be due diligence, financial analysis done with the ordinance. 'Cause ordinance. But the order, that is, others.
Just from a practical perspective, so what you were referencing was 530 Albert Street, and the proposed developer was coming in with a low-income housing project. There were multiple implications on the project that had to be negotiated, including a low-income housing tax credit, which would also require a master service agreement. All of those have negotiated in different percentages. And in addition, on that one, we had the current usage, which was, we obtained revenue from it, from 530 as a parking area. And my concern about that is just in that exact project, what isn't flexible is the annual application deadline with the state for the low-income housing tax credit. And so that one, if we were going to do it, it was like very, very quick deadlines, and that does happen sometimes. And so if we did put in due diligence periods, depending on the funding source and the ability, you know, and the different factors of purchasing land, options and things like that, we could certainly prohibit certain types of development would be my only thought about the nuts and bolts of how it would work. Again, not putting a policy perspective, my policy perspective, but just
That makes sense. I mean,
from a timing
yeah,
perspective.
that's very true. I guess I'm looking at it from the perspective. We want to protect the taxpayers of these things and want to have information on financial impact in the city. when something happens. So on that deal, there was also discussion they were going to get, I think it was 30 years of discounted parking leases
Parking.
and the parking grant tax. I mean, these are major things that go on for decades. So I just, it just struck me as not the way we ought to operate. That sort of stuff, not a financial analysis conducted by anybody. Not that that has to be that can change. I mean, all these factors, but you negotiate, but there ought to be a general financial analysis done. So
But
we're not making bad decisions.
I'm gonna take a little bit of an issue with Tony's point, because just like when you're buying a used car, you gotta be able to walk away. And so the idea that this is gonna be here tomorrow, so you gotta do this now, you only got till 6 o'clock, by 6 o'clock, this is out of here, you gotta. You know, we have a coveted real estate environment, we need to start acting like people who want desperately to own, buy, build here. We are big guys, if this doesn't work for them, too bad, that's sad for their story, you know what I mean, like,
And
we
to
don't.
that extent, council did walk away from
But,
the.
so if we, you gotta do it right now, you can't, don't look at the details, just get the undercoding, like, if the rushing, never let yourself be rushed, it's not, it's a rule to live by.
So, Jennifer, are you, in addition to possibly having as an ordinance, would it be good to also have something in the charter? I don't think it has both sides of that. Yeah, yes.
This sort of just came up to us, look through the next section, taxation, there's a couple sections, taxation, assessments, general finance, so I don't know exactly where this has been an issue for the last couple of decades. And I wish Robert here, because Robert was new on the job pretty much. I was really impressed that he made that happen. Yeah. Also kind of shocked that the city had done there was no memo on like what's gonna happen with the potential financial impact. Yeah, I think that should be somewhere in here on the wish list, on the resident, somewhere.
It makes more sense to do it in some of the next sessions, so that's a sections,
Sure.
chapters, so let's keep that in mind.
Don't forget
If I could
because
add one
I
thing,
have to get on a new chapter, but I think it fits in
Okay,
development. Feasibility.
And that suggests to me that it should be an ordinance, not within the charter. If we have to create or craft something special. I don't disagree with what Jeffrey's saying about the need to get information out to the public in a timely manner. That's important. But it seems like we've sort of gotten diverted onto this, this side issue about how to address these questions about how do we get information out in a timely manner, when what we're really trying to do is craft a framework within which we can modify or add additional or add ordinances to go forward with that and to make sure those things are covered. I agree that we can't, you're right. We shouldn't have to, to try and accelerate things just because there's a looming deadline. But I think we can do this more artfully and maybe, put it on a list of ordinances with some recommendations. Also,
and respect, this seems like an issue that I would frame more as a policy disagreement. If we feel like, if the citizens of East Lansing feel like the council isn't doing its due diligence in getting information out to the citizens of East Lansing, that they should be voted out. And that's,
the council didn't have this information, right?
and
No, it didn't.
all the more, so all the more reason, if council is acting on information and they don't have sufficient information
And they
to
don't
be
ask
acting
for
on it, then they need to be asking for it. If they don't, then they should be voted out.
Yeah.
Right, like, and I'm not making any, and so, and I don't know the specifics of this specific case that you guys are talking about, but that's just my general thought is that what we're drafting here is, this is how the city runs X, Y, Z, and I think adding additional red tape, especially something where, something could undo an action of council if there wasn't a due diligence period, and then you have lawsuits about it, and then you have X, Y, Z things that, you can have a list of catastrophes that might happen where you have to undo things that have already been done because the charter wasn't followed. It seems to me to be setting us up, would be setting up the city for more of a headache, than I think when we are maybe considering sitting here today.
So we're on the chapter 10, the budget procedure, and we've talked about a couple different things. So let's talk about 10.2. Does the committee kind of coalesce around 1, 2, or 3? So we get some direction here. The alternative 1 was the city manager adopt a budget process calendar annually, and changing that to 6 months before the next fiscal year, rather than 7 months. So that gave you, I think, January, they would be that. Or do we want no later than the second meeting or the first discussion meeting, or then no later than April 15th was the second option, or 3 at such time that may be fixed by the city manager? Falling under one or the other.
I think 1 and 2, an annual calendar, but that it's not occurring later than April 15th. So directed to do an annual calendar with the dates ahead of time and with the direction that date not be beyond April 15th.
Can I just ask a question before we go forward with that? Diane, the 10.2 and 2 includes language about itemized estimates of expenditures and itemized budgets. And would we assume that the budget process calendar would include the itemized expenditures by department and stuff? Because I don't want at some point somebody to say, oh yeah, at the last minute, here it all is, instead of making sure that maybe there's a more rational way to approve it. I'm just asking, I don't know, and
Well, they do itemize it all out, and it's based on all those budget meetings from February. It might have been later this year, but we used to start in February on. And at the 15th, it was, they started to have these meetings where they were showing with the community development block grant coming in and responding to what the proposed budget was. And they had that all set up that way. So then they had that extra month before they had to adopt it. So when you're talking about Pam having the April 15th in there, wouldn't your finance department set it up so that they could have those dates hard and certain rather than trying to put them in the charter? Again.
Right, that's when the manager could do the annual calendar based on the meeting schedule, but making sure that this budget process point occurs prior to April 15th. So it's got to be a meeting that's prior to April 15th. That gives us the buffer. See what I'm saying? So we'd be no later than the first regular meeting of the city council prior to April 15th, right? Could that be? Because what I'm hearing happen is that first meeting in April is very tight, right? It comes right after. They don't have any, isn't that what he was saying, that they just need another week? It's just that first one is so tight. I thought that's kind of what I heard him saying.
Support the April 15th deadline, and I would expect that any city manager would develop an annual calendar without being told in the charter.
That's a good point. I agree.
So would you say no later than April 15th, but not the first regular meeting?
Yeah, that's
Right.
Okay.
So however that falls with the meeting calendar.
So, Owen, that would mean what your department has been talking about, putting one with the deadline of no later than April 15th.
I do believe so. That was one of our department suggestions.
And you're not concerned that you wouldn't get a calendar?
I guess my only concern, now that we're just having that discussion about April 15th, is there a world where there wouldn't be a regular city council meeting prior to April 15th? And in that world, does that mean that budget has to be submitted in March, essentially?
No, because you're gonna drive that. The city manager knows this is a deadline. City manager is gonna drive it based on what his or her finance department will say. We want to have it here, your meeting as close to this date as possible. But looking at the calendar, there's just 1 week in there. That's gonna be that Easter week when everybody is out of there. Because that seems to be the school calendars times.
But apparently we could have a special meeting scheduled.
All right, so Tony, you have enough to do
Yeah.
10.2.
So are we not including the annual calendar in this with using that hard and fast April 15th,
No,
not later than?
we're gonna adopt a budget process calendar annually, 6 months before the next fiscal year. And then the last part, but no later than April 15th. Be in the last sentence there. So we're keeping all that rest of the other stuff in there. So that'll come back to us at our next meeting. We'll see if it meets everyone. We'll make sure it circulates to your department to see if that makes sense, and we'll have Mr. Bellman do that too. Asia will have Mr. Bellman do that, right? Okay, thank you. All right, so then going on to 10.3, we didn't have anything that we had concerns about in there.
These are all really references to uniform budgeting and accounting, which we're required to follow under the Home Rule City Act.
Okay, so then 10.4 is budget hearing. So we have that in there. We have it at least 1 week in advance by the city clerk. We have a copy of that will be on file and available for inspection. So, at the office of the clerk. So we're assuming, I'm just reading this the way it is. I'm assuming a copy of that means a physical copy. Is that what everyone else thinks when they read that? For inspection. It doesn't say you can take it with you, but it will also be online. It will be online too, because
It'll be online.
yes. Do you want us to include online too?
Yeah.
At least one week?
Okay, where are we?
10.4, it's on the bottom of the one page to the top of the other that it talks about.
So could we insert the word online on page 23 where it says that the publication is equally available online and available online to the public?
I think we created some language where when documents were being made available to the public, we said at the city clerk's office, at the city library, and on the city website. So maybe we could track that language.
Yeah.
That's in one of our things tonight to look at. Okay. Right, and then we have 10.5. I thought, this is where we talked about that, whether we wanted it, the way it is, or whether we want it further, is that right?
I would propose that we just say not later than May 31st. The council shall.
That work?
In practice, is there a difference between the two? If council's only gonna act at formal meetings, right?
They can create a special meeting for the purpose of adopting the budget, if it's properly noticed.
Oh, so it would be so like getting rid of the last regular meeting and allow the flexibility of having a special meeting. So there is a practical difference, okay.
Y'all okay with that?
It's not gonna give him, I got the feeling he wanted to go that first week in June. The 31st is possible. What's the?
Yeah, and this will be circulated to your department too, so you can,
18 hours,
Oh, that's all.
a special meeting.
Yeah, so,
We
so,
typically do it well in advance. of
right,
that,
but
but that is-
if there was a crunch for some reason, at the beginning of May and we knew there'd be a crunch, that would be ample time to schedule a special budget meeting towards the end of the month or something.
So we're going with May 31st.
Not later than May 3rd.
And then the last thing that we talked about was 10.9. And they wanted to change within 180 days. And the last sentence.
Logic of having a 90-day deadline in there.
Happy to get some preliminary numbers out to the community.
And I give them time to review them before the final was done, right? So if we change it to 180, then now
Right, it almost seems like it's reversed, like we should be saying, okay, 90 days, you publish it and you get it audited, and then 180 after that, it's audited and official.
That's what it is.
Yeah, but then the 90 comes after 180.
Right.
Yeah.
Just to the sense, so that makes it a little confusing.
Yeah.
Because, so what we're saying, the preliminary budget must be published within 90 days, and then 90 days from then, we publish the official audited, tidied up, always good.
And 90 probably isn't enough, but I'm not sure you want to go to 180.
So fiscal year closes on June 30th. And 180 days gives you till the close of
December.
December.
the 90 days.
So it gives you till the end of December. And this is saying that in September, they could do a preliminary. It's really a preliminary. It's not the actual verified one. I think there's some method to this a little bit, because you get it and then December, and then you start the next budget thing all over. And there's a meeting where you're trying to adjust all of the appropriations so that the budget is balanced. They're doing that in June, if I remember correctly. So that's because it's required that you have to have a balanced budget, right? So at one of the last meetings, that's also another reason for having that extra month in there, is now they turn around and readjust, like, okay, Parks and Rec has some extra money to move to here so that we can subsidize where we went over in this. So that might lend itself to what we were talking about before. May 31st meets that guideline earlier that we talked about, so that gives them the month to do it, gives them some meetings in June to reappropriate the money. So this, it still goes to, it's not the complete audited report, because what would you suggest would be?
Well, I just think to see preliminary numbers, not from this finance person, I'm talking as a citizen now. I gotta wait till December to see preliminary numbers for a June year end. Does not seem,
Right, and
now 90 may be too fast, maybe 120 or some other number. But to wait till the end of December to see any kind of numbers.
well,
Doesn't seem like what we want in something as.
We've been doing this for 27 years with 90 days.
right, and the 90 days, remember, is not asking for the budget, it's saying, in a form that will disclose pertinent facts concerning the activities and finances of the city. So that is very general. It is more of an executive summary of the budget.
Of the year, of the,
Yeah,
not the budget, the actual.
Yeah, oh yeah, not the budget, the expenditures, the
Right.
city's expenditures for the previous year. So it's, I think 90 days is reasonable to write an executive summary.
And I think that, just to add to that, I think it's helpful because our next tax bill goes out on December 1st. So it would be nice for people who are looking at that next tax bill to have that, even if they're not audited final numbers, to know, when you get the next payment, you think, holy cow, now what am I paying for? Is to have that answer available to them before the end of December. I don't know whether 90 days or 120 days is a better thing there, but it would be nice. And I mean, it would be really nice if the assessor might find a way to include like a pie chart with, you know, the budget and what small amount of our general fund actually goes to subsidize our stuff, but that's getting in the weeds again. But it would be nice to have these figures available to tell people before the next tax bill comes.
Now, the December tax bill has no city taxes. That's
Right.
all county and other related things.
Right, but everybody's starting, but it drives people to look.
Right, just saying, to put that on the December tax bill doesn't make sense, but
Don't,
put it on the July tax
But
bill
it's
when we're
available.
actually levying for the city.
Yeah, that's.
Dale?
I was gonna say for the, like this annual city business report, there's no, it doesn't like prescribe any like requirements of like what needs to be in that report. So it'd essentially just be up to the city manager, I guess, to decide like what they actually reported on with that. So as far as like the technical stuff goes, I think it's like, will really just be up to their discretion.
If we put 90, if we keep it within 90 days, I know Owen mentioned some concern. Can you remind us what was the concern in this section?
The primary concern was just that if there's a change, maybe potentially a significant change between what's kind of published in that initial 90-day report versus what the accurate, correct financial statements, audited financial statements. That could create confusion, could create misinformation because the public's getting a report that says one thing, but then ultimately that number has changed.
But remember, it's translated by the city manager, and we expect the city manager to say, oh, these numbers are fuzzy, I'm not gonna report on that, or these are likely to be audited, because this is it's just an executive summary, bird's eye view, finances are decent, our credit rating still an A, we've got these legacy costs, you know, that's gonna be that kind of high level.
Were they thinking that it was a real generalized thing when you discussed this? Or were they thinking it was going to be very specific?
Generalized, do you mean a 90-day report?
Yes.
Versus, I do believe, that's my understanding of the 90-day report. We didn't have a specific conversation about necessarily what the content was.
So- So, why don't we leave this here? You take back our concerns about the citizen, the tax bill, and then look at the calendar. I don't know if you guys have, I'm sorry, I don't know if your department has looked at that, city calendar to see what report is in there, because that might make you a little less concerned because of how it's reported. Because that is the report, and it says it has to be published within 90 days and disclose that. So that calendar has been coming out in October to all the department, I'm sorry, to all the, I want to say commissions and stuff. If you want a city calendar, it's available at City Hall. That's got some pie charts and things like that in there. Why don't you look at that and see if then that lessens any concern that you have there, since that, I know not everyone might be familiar with the department, or you might not have even seen the calendar yourself.
I have one other question. Is there a real concern that there's going to be major discrepancy between the audit and this preliminary report? Because if there is, then we've got other problems in the city. I mean, I see budgets being off after auditing by a little bit, but I mean, the kind of thing that you're worried about being a major discrepancy would be kind of things that bells and whistles ought to be going off in city council long before it gets from a preliminary report to an audited report. Has there been an experience before in the finance department that you're aware of, acknowledging that you've only been here for 3 months, but
Yeah, not that I'm aware of that there's been that issue. I guess the primary, like maybe an example would be the implementation of new accounting standards. There's been a few more complicated accounting standards that have been issued in recent years. So it would just be if the finance staff are kind of reviewing and making changes back and forth with the external audit firm. It just kind of sometimes makes us a little nervous to publish numbers, to put things out there in a world where it's not definite.
There don't have to be numbers, it doesn't even look like in the.
Yeah.
If 90 days.
And it does seem like based off this conversation that there's enough discretion. The city that we could make it clear that, hey, this specific area under further.
Right, and this is really the city manager's problem. So it's his report. If it wouldn't necessarily reflect on you guys if it turned out to be a discrepancy.
They do.
And yeah, I was gonna say, I'm not familiar with this specific report, but the state actually requires the city to do two reports. The audit being the one, and then there's another one called the F-65 annual financial statements, which is just like a different format of a lot of the audit data, but even among that, there's a lot of discrepancies. A lot of time in the data that like is being reported, just between like information they should have. So, yeah, there's always a chance for different.
Yeah, there doesn't seem to be support for going 180 days for posted reports. But whatever we settle on, I think the language should be that the first report is mentioned in the paragraph, and then the final report, because it's confusing.
Good point. So you got that?
Yeah, we want to make that change or waive follow-up information.
Well, I think you should rewrite it with that, and then if we have a question about just changing the date, we can do that at the meeting, but. All right, so that's chapter 10, that's our new business. And so now we get to go over our old business, which we have to do that. So we're gonna start with the discussion of 4.1, the resolution regarding gender neutrality. And does anybody have any comments on that to start?
And just preliminarily, I just want to remind everyone, like I think I do every time, this is just from my notes and not trying to shove any particular language into the ideas. There were a lot of conversations on this one in particular, but on all of them. And so if it's inaccurate from what everyone calls, please let me know.
So let me just ask, that's just a general question. How would this have to be something on the ballot, or is this just something that we resolve when we do pass a resolution at city?
It would be the latter. It would be a resolution of city council to amend the charter, just like all the others. But the reason I just did it by an overall resolution, because there are so many locations in the charter. I didn't want to list all of them or enumerate all of them, but the process would be the same.
Thanks, Colin, for coming. You did great.
Thank you.
So on the ballot, it would say, do you say yay or nay?
Yes, particularly the East Lansing City Charter has gender-specific references throughout. If this change is adopted, it would make all references gender.
What do you plan on saying? Person?
Yeah.
And that's the other thing that, I didn't know if you wanted to get into detail in the recommendation as to them, the person. So I didn't include it in this. And I don't recall if Elaine Hardy had given any recommendation. She was here.
I had the same question to Jill had, because I thought we talked about it, we were going to try to use a city attorney section, that's 6.8, was saying. Starts off saying city attorney shall blah, 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 it says he or she. So I thought we would get sort of indicate, like, for that example, say the city attorney shall be approved. I think we should have, give some direction, all right? Yeah, I also have a question, I guess, how many gender references are actually in the charter? I know there's a handful, I don't think there's that many. I'd be curious if we just listed them out, see what language in there, suggest that to the.
Well, we could probably do something more specific, I think, to address your concern. When we're under something that's naming administrative offices or something like that, we use a title. When we have he or she in these things, we would just say they or them. Is that, or do we want to say person? What's the word for when you see he or she? Because he or she is in here a lot. I just highlighted that on there. Okay.
But for most of those are in sections where it's referring to someone.
I just did a quick control F search, there are 12 examples of he or she, or 12 kids of he or she, 12 kids of his or her. So it's a good number.
Like on page 6, it's under the mayor, says he or she, well, that could be just the mayor. the
Right.
Mayor.
So title is our preference first, and then,
In person.
person.
They, for them also maybe, or listening to the appropriate sentence that the person sometimes. For Lansing.
So will we see those, all those places before we send this off to council?
We certainly can. I think we should.
Or version or their own pink.
And the reason to do it this way is so that we don't have 24, if it is a section that we're not otherwise amending, that we don't introduce 24 more valid questions that are solely 6.8 says the city attorney and references it as a he, she. We're going to change it to the title.
And if we did reference the specific charter provisions in the resolution, we would have to make it a separate ballot question, right? As opposed to this general ballot question, as opposed to this general resolution where we just do
In
it
the
all.
resolution, you could note, we could specifically note all those that are there, yeah.
It might be to supply sample documents.
The city council will decide what to put on the ballot. They'll choose the ballot question.
That is correct.
It doesn't matter what we say.
Yeah, we're just talking about the form of your resolution to them requesting they make this essentially.
Did you get confirmation, Tony, that you
Yes,
consolidated that?
yes.
So, so we don't have to do anything with this then, to say, or do you want us? We just say this and we send our recommendation to them saying use title whenever, is that what you would suggest rather than put title and he or she in here?
Oh, no, we can certainly add that to this. If that's the specific recommendation, absolutely. Otherwise, this essentially leaves that to the discretion.
Okay, and
Okay,
we want to do that then.
Okay, so regarding gender neutrality, we'll move it so that to reference individuals by positions. Don't think we'll need a backup, just, I think we can use that. So, yeah.
All right. So that one's still out there. The next one is 6.8. This is going to our petitions, kind of addressing. It's been a problem when you have to go to the charter versus. Sorry, this is just making a reasonable amount.
Thought we discussed this last time, I try to track same standard as the charter amendment. That would be 1 year for signature, 7 months. There's 2 references to that. Combine 3 and then farther down. Start with any sort of 6 months. If you don't do that, then you still make a charter amendment. So, motion or is it interesting to change that?
Is there anything else on here? Because if we just want to do that, we could then move this forward. Did this mean everything felt like what we discussed?
I'll just read.
With those amendments.
Do you want to make that motion?
Me too.
Yeah.
Okay, I move to change section 6.8, which stating within 6 months to then is it 1 year or 12 months or
Let's do 12 months,
Probably.
because
And otherwise, include the changes that are set forth in the draft resolution.
yes.
I'm gonna do examples of that. All right, yeah.
Yeah, there's another one.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's behind lines up. Starts with head signatures.
So it's been moved by, Hank and seconded by Martinez to approve resolution to 6.8 with the amendments. Any discussion on this? All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. Okay. Okay, next one is 7.2.
To designate an administrative officer or department head to give him the flexibility not to have these 6 people that are listed above.
I just, that wasn't in my notes.
I think that's what you want. That's what he's doing, right?
Remember,
Can you say that?
we talked about that.
I think we did.
Is it better to wait for Robert to be here to find out what's the thing?
Because, you know, if he wants to do the parks director, he can. He wants to do. Whether he can, based on this.
I had or department head in there. I had or department that were legal.
That's even better.
Because didn't he say that there was one he put into? Because legally couldn't.
It's the city clerk.
I think.
City clerk, because she's administrator. City clerk is actually city clerk, administrative officer.
I don't care.
She is.
I don't care. I just think he should have the most flexibility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was glad, because I thought he was saying he only wanted to do one. But I'm glad to see both of them because I'm concerned that these titles might appear in other documentation like event response plans and stuff. So frequently there'll be positions identified in other governmental units. And we want to make sure we've got people in those positions.
Okay, well, I'm more willing to hold this till he's here just to make sure it's clear. But there is a question about, and I sent this to Tony to look at yesterday, so late last night, outside. So he needs to look into it about whether there's a requirement. There's some case law out there about whether you can require a public employee to live within a certain distance of the city. So before we eliminate totally of this, we want to make sure if that's a if that's a possibility, we want to preserve that right. And it's up to council to put it in there.
He'll tell for sure. I did a lot of research, but I could not, ended up in Washington State. I got really good for us. But, and I thought I was looking at Michigan. That's what I thought. City manager was exempt for not being able to repeat. But, and these fires in California have laid on my disaster recovery response nerves. It can be critical to have people be able to get to an emergency response center. So if you have a designated lead and they can't get here, an unplanned emergency response, that's where the distance, where like a fire chief and first responders may have requirements to be within a certain travel time to an emergency headquarters. So,
Yeah, it's MCL 15.6022. And the governing case is 2007 at Flash versus City of Traverse City, 479-180. And in that case, the
Can
statute,
you read that MCL number that didn't?
sure, 15.6022.
It's a 2 sub 2.
Yeah, got it.
I'm lower.
Yeah, and so sub 2 though, that's where I said, like the city manager contract, we can include that in any, we can include that any provision, including move to the city within the contract. And that's what sub 2 allows. I can't.
In Lash, it was a it was a matter within the city required public employees to reside within a distance of 20 miles. And the question in that case really just, where it was on how you measured the 20 miles. But in this case, my concern is that there's so much remote work that's going on. I don't want a city manager in Marquette. I mean, in my view, the city manager needs to be here in East Lansing or within a surrounding community. So they participate in community activities. They know what's going on in the cities. And I think 602 sub 2 allows us to do that. And certainly, the Michigan Supreme Court has suggested that. And that's how I read it.
And so what is the distance you want, presuming, and I'm familiar with Lash, so what is the distance that you want me to?
602 sub 2 says it has to be no less than 20 miles. And I don't have it here, but there's an app that says that you get, it's 20 miles from the nearest boundary. So if you do, there's an app that lets you pinpoint the center of a town and does 20 miles. I think 20 miles incorporates as far east or far west as Portland and maybe Swartz Creek and down to out to Fowlerville and stuff. It gives us a pretty big radius. I might suggest 25 miles, and that gives us a good buffer zone. But that allows enough room for somebody who moves, who's going to be required here and says, I can't afford to live in East Lansing, or I can't find any place to live in East Lansing, to find some place in a surrounding community that would put them within my space or two. Yeah, there's an exception for a spouse who's got, has a restriction in their employment contract. And that I think would be, we certainly need to accommodate. But I think, 25 miles would give us a pretty good, good buffer zone in this case.
And keeps they're relocated.
Yes.
So that, if they're from out of state or whether then they're relocating here.
They're relocated.
Yeah.
But then they're going to be a part of this community.
Yeah.
It says public employees, it doesn't say public safety.
No, it says public employees.
Which really kind of goes against the other one where it says you can't restrict, you can't require memberships, but then.
No, in this case, you can't require residency, but you can say that they have to live within a certain perimeter of the city.
How does that apply to the current city manager?
I think
We're
it
gonna
is.
retroactively try to tell him he's got to change.
No.
So he has a contract, when the contract's up. If this charter provision had been voted on, that would be in place. And his contract says something like, he has to be offered a substantially similar, I think is what the words are, something like that. You can't change all the rules of the thing, but it says somewhat similar. And so that's what I would ask you. What would that mean? Given the language that's in it? Yeah, and looking at the language in this contract.
We're looking at modifying the charter going forward. We're not worrying about what's happening with Mr. Bellman's contract with the city right now. That contract was made under the city charter we're right now working under, which contains language which is contrary to state law. So I think that Mr. Bellman's, at the time that his contract renews or not, if we were to adopt a
Ballot proposal. If we
a ballot
the ballot.
proposal, then he would need, then it depends on what happens with his contract.
We could also choose to create a grandfather clause if we were really concerned about. I don't know if that would be the best idea, but that's an option that,
Right.
except for we could just say, except for those employed by the city at the time of the passage of this amendment, blah, blah, blah.
But if we think this is important,
Exactly, and that's why it's just,
we make a choice to do that, there's possibilities to do it.
Well, we know we're gonna do it for everybody else too.
I'm just saying it's an option if there was concerns about it, but I'm not saying that I think it's a good idea.
For the city attorney?
This is This is a concern. Well, you had the argument with Tom Yates about city attorney.
There was an ordinance at the time that said it had to be passed. The city appealed that ordinance, because it was unconstitutional. Slightly different thing, I'm just saying. I wouldn't single out the city manager if it's something people are interested in. Apply it all.
I think that the responsibilities of city attorney are much different from those of a city manager. I'm as a city attorney, I can, if I had a city attorney hat on, how I dealt with municipal codes would not vary a lot from one to the other, but as a city manager, you're expected to know and participate in the activities of the community. I would expect that a city manager, for example, would, be here on Friday nights to attend the homecoming parade or to know what the city is like on a basketball during March Madness or something.
Go to all the parks
To see what's going on. And that would require somebody who's accessible to the community. And I think that, so we're talking here about amending a city manager provision.
So why don't you take a look at that and see, make sure.
I'll work with you on all these issues to make sure we bring back.
And I think we've got to be cognizant too of a high salary leader of the city role versus basic pay staff trying to relocate for,
Well, and I'll give you an example. When the police chief had retired, and this is years ago, they were looking at the candidates, and the one candidate was highly qualified, and there was a time when they felt like they needed somebody to come from the outside, maybe, because just to have some fresh eyes. And the person was living in Grand Haven and said up front that they would not be moving. And that made the city manager, because the city manager picks that person, that made the city manager say, I can't have that. I want them to live, I want them to live in this community, not required to live in East Lansing, but I want to pick someone that knows this area rather than.
how about it's responding to an emergency, able to be on site in emergency?
And they didn't get the job because of that. That was the key reason. Highly qualified and would have been, thought it would have addressed some issues at the time.
You see, last night, the city council considered, I believe, or looking at something from the Rights Commission to allow non-residents to sit on HRC, which I don't know if that's allowed or not.
It's not right now. That's one of the commissions. It isn't. The Arts Commission allows someone from the outside. But then the Senior Commission allows somebody, I believe, also that's not a member of city. Yes.
The residency charter on
No, it's an
or on a
ordinance.
sufficient on commission basis.
I believe it's an ordinance that says that for each commission.
Also the issue with the city attorney, that's not a full-time job.
Yeah, then there's that.
He's not a
Consultant. basically.
Exactly.
You know,
They brought it up, right.
No,
All
seriously.
right. So we're gonna put that aside, get some more information before they make that major change. And Lynn was the one that brought that to me. We did some research on it, so that's helpful. Because it is a huge change. Because we're doing some major changes in the city. So, too. All right.
And this is another one when we put on the ballot, we need to explain that's against the law. Because who would vote against that, getting rid of that? That's another one that,
But which one?
getting rid of that they have to be a resident within 90 days. Everybody would say yes to that.
okay.
Why are we eliminating it? Because it's.
Oh, I know,
against the
yeah,
law.
yeah, oh, I see. what you're
It's
saying,
not
that
to be-
conflicts with,
Exactly.
Yeah.
What you would vote for.
yeah, that's a good point, that's exactly what I thought.
Okay, so then our next one is, I have this right, our next one is leaves. Chapter 8. Okay.
I had a small thing on this one. I feel like this is written differently than the other charter provisions where the other charter provisions are demands or commands. This is more written as the policy statement. So I think this should change that the city shall be dedicated to the transparency of the proceedings and record. All public meetings shall be subject to the Open Meetings Act and so on. So that's a change that I think we should be having.
So, and my concern is, and we talked about this, we could talk about it more, that instead of, we've got a lot of different locations for public documents articulated here and there in the charter, and they vary. And we decided that there was going to be a standard of that the charter, that public documents will be available during business hours in City Hall, City Library, and on the city website. And I want that to be, like, as a citizen, what's the fencing ordinances? What's, that's what I want to see. Now, the explanation, the legal explanation, that can stay, but I think we're not referencing a lot of other details like that in a lot of, why does that have to be in the charter? I don't mind if it is, but why the legal details of open meetings?
Oh, I don't think he's changing anything. I mean, the public gotta,
I don't think we should be changing anything except for the
anything.
tenets, I suppose, of the.
Right, my concern is the wording is very legalese and it's very hard to parse. The city is dedicated, I get the dedicated to transparency proceeding, all public meetings are subject to Michigan Open Meetings Act, public records, notice, blah, blah. That doesn't tell me where I can find.
No, but he's not advocating that anything else be changed. It's just an order.
Yeah, I think.
The city shall be dead.
I'm suggesting that it be changed. I'm suggesting that we pull up and out and put up front that all public records are available here. And
Oh,
then
you're
the other,
suggesting
then
that
the other
that
stuff-
those two things be.
yeah, be like kind of or move down so that when you look at it, what you're seeing is where the stuff is posted. That is our act of transparency. And then the details about open meetings, so that's.
So 8.1, the last sentence would be 8.1, 8.2 would be the rest of the thing without that sentence.
Oh, I hadn't thought about that. Or it's just gonna be.
We should just switch the order.
Yeah, I just meant pull up all public records, including those identified by this charter, are available during business hours in the city hall, the city library, and on the city website. And then we can go into the city, well, even if the city is dedicated to transparency, I don't mind if we kick off of that. That's, people understand what that means. But the part about the Public Meetings Act and the Michigan Freedom of Information Act and the public, that, most people aren't gonna be concerned about that. Like, that's when I go to say, where are the public records?
All right, so if you're wanting to make it very clear, if you put 8.1, say access of public records, and then you say section 8.2, the city is dedicated, and you talk about that as the transparency, what's the heading of that? If you don't think people are going to be looking for transparency, or you can do vice versa, but if you want up front, where's the access? I'm looking in the charter, access to public records, it's going to say this, and
Does that create two ballot questions though, for two sections?
Or we could just,
it's a whole chapter we're putting forward.
but couldn't we just move the wording up so the first sentence grabs you that this is where the documents are? And then the transparency, which is supported by the Open Meetings Act and the two other sentences become subservient to that, because if you want to read through the details, but in the meantime, you just want to see how tall a fence you can build, just go this, and we're gonna have a lot of places that are pointing to this, right? Because we've got a lot of documents, public documents that we initially said we were just gonna reference this section or some way to, we're not repeating this over and over again in the document where each public document comes up, but we're gonna be referring to this.
Well,
Right.
you might, when we get to it, we just did it in the other part, when we added the 3 places.
Yeah, when we initially talked about how this would be the generic footnote of where everything is, but.
Why don't we move the last sentence to the second sentence?
Great.
So we say the city is dedicated to transparency of
City shall, yeah, the city is, yeah.
and then we go into all public records are, and then we go into the meetings are subject to the Open Meetings Act. Yeah, that, I think is really good at that.
I want to ask a question, Dan. Have you ever been blocked by someone who uses FOIA? It's an obstacle for you to get the documents you're looking for.
No.
Send you a letter. And say,
I got no FOIA business, but that has never come up in my life because I just want to know if I buy this house, where fence gonna be laid out? Do I have people, how far, where's my shed go on my lot?
Sometimes FOIA can be abused, you get a clerk, they'll tell you, oh, yeah, sure. They cost you $200,000.
Yeah, I've been to 6 FOIA lunches. Like,
Yeah,
I'm
I'm
surrounded,
just saying.
right, I'm surrounded by
I
lawyers.
always thought about this was, you're about access to documents, right? So when we reference, obviously, the Freedom of Information Act is the law that's in place, but can we make our transparency superior to what's provided by FOIA? Are we doing that with this already? We say stuff is gonna be available on the city website.
As long, that's my vision.
Then what exactly is meant? I mean, it's one thing to say the documents disclosure mandated by the charter to reference things there, but to me, that sounds super expensive.
Well, that has to be identified as those records are generated. I mean, talking about that.
Public record is defined in the FOIA,
Yeah.
which is why I use that.
Right.
terminology.
Right.
I personally believe, and there is some case law that everybody said on point, that it does, that the FOIA and I didn't see it about the FOIA preempts further more restrictive local laws or more expansive local laws. That's never been challenged. It's not to
I think more restrictive.
but if we wanted to expand beyond FOIA, we would need to be extremely detailed as to what that expansion was.
Right, that's when when a document is created, then that document is either public document or not public document. Then if somebody decides, oh, that's not public, you got FOIA it, then that's a different matter. But if we want to articulate somewhere, this is now a public document, these preliminary budget documents will be shared because they're agendas, that sort of thing.
FOIA says public record means a writing prepared, owned, used, possession of, or retained by a public body in performance of official function from the time it is created. Not can include computer software.
If you go down to the definition of record, it does provide the explanation. It breaks all those down.
So what you're looking for, Jeff, and I think what is a more general statement about public documents versus the handling of the documents specifically identified in this charter?
I was just trying to address, you want the stuff to be very accessible. I do too, so it's pretty clear what, other than the stuff that we reference in the charter, what else is available on the city website. While you're in city hall, people without having.
I think that's,
You brought this up a bunch of times. Do we have a list of important documents?
I was only talking about the charter. Yeah, that would be great. I love expansion.
I think that's an undertaking that's way beyond what we're tasked.
Yeah, I was
with
just
doing
worried
here.
about the very locations.
What are we tasked? I keep asking myself this question because I thought we were tasked to try to improve the city charter.
Writing what?
Yeah, what's our task here on this commission? Because I kind of feel maybe we're not all looking at this the same way.
The resolution.
Yeah, okay. What do you all feel we're here to do? I look at this, we're here to look at the charter and improve it, provide a better government for plans.
Sure.
And it's frustrating that your idea is shot down when someone's trying to do that, or not your ideas put forward at all. Thank you. I feel like Pam and I keep putting ideas forward and people are just, we're just doing a lot of support. Okay, I'd like to hear other people put some ideas forward and bring things. Same, the people haven't, but I would love for people to put more ideas forward to us to consider here, so. Thank you,
But
Pam, for continuing to put forward ideas for us to think about.
Jack, where do you separate operational things versus the core of the city? And if the core of the city, which is based on the charter, has it served the city wrong? Are we updating the charter so it meets meets current standards? Or is it, we want to add additional things because of what's going on here, which we have done, we're talking about doing this as human rights and, but if you're asking things about specific problems you've had in the past, again, isn't that the ordinance controls? Isn't that where you put those things? Because you've run into specific problems because the Home Rule Act gives us so many definitions of how the city should run. And to add even more restrictions in the city, that are different, that's to me where you put ordinances, but that, I'm not the lawyer, but I want a simple charter. I don't want a charter that has so much specific things in there that you'd have to go to a ballot to change something in there. I
Well,
just
think
want
you have
basic
two-
rights.
You have two questions starting. Your update the charter, make it conform, say, let's say yes. The second question was, what else we're trying to make it better, and I'd say yes. Both of those should be argued.
So when you get to an issue or some suggestion that you put forward, do you ever ask, is it better to have it in an ordinance versus that? I mean,
Of course.
you did
If
talk about,
something's not in the charter, though, there's no guarantee it's going to follow.
But this is an example to me, if you wanted to say, I believe that this specific communication should be public record, we could put that in there. It's not about, what is it?
And I don't do that as restriction
No,
or red tape.
You can come up with.
I'll go back to the financial analysis stuff earlier. It's not been being done. I don't view that as red tape or restriction. I think that city government should operate to do those sort of things. That's core. And a lot of things can be done by ordinance, absolutely. But we have a charter that compares to a lot of cities, we're sort of in the middle. Could be a little similar, but also could include a lot of stuff that we don't have in here, which the Homeschool City Act allows, which could make our city function better, could expand the rights of our people, could provide more protections. And I don't view that as a bad thing. I think the city of Lansing charter now is up to like 142 pages or something. Maybe that's way too much, but a lot of these cities have more expensive charters. It's not a problem. So all I'm just saying is I think it's good if people put forward ideas to try this. What, once every 10 or 20 year process. So we're not going to put ideas forward and do stuff, and very few people will.
I don't, if I can interrupt for a minute, simply because you advance an idea and the rest of us disagree with it, doesn't mean that your idea was wrong or shouldn't be considered. I think that that's something we're all here doing. It just means that more of us disagree with you than agree with you. The other thing though, and I agree, I think we're all here to try and improve the city charter. You yourself, for example, you're talking about how the city of Lansing has a charter that's 140 some pages long. We're a smaller city. We're a council type of government, not a mayoral form of government. And so the Lansing City Charter may have other things. I haven't read it, but it may have other provisions included in it that are pertinent and important to its governance under a mayoral form of government. And you yourself used the illustration of a meeting ago or so about what happens about all of these ordinances we get in there about women can't cut their hair or something or other. We don't want to include all of the getting down in the weeds kind of stuff when we're working on the charter. I think some of the things we get talking about, at least as in my perspective, are policy decisions. I don't think we're here to set policy. That's the city council's job, is to set policy. We can make recommendations and have, based on what we think at times may be good policy, but as a broad thing, I think that those are, in trying to make day-to-day life better for the citizens of this community, are things that really should be done by ordinance and are within the purview of the city council to do. I don't think those things fall within the governing architecture of this community, and that's really what we're here to evaluate, at least in my understanding of things.
Well, the resolution says we're supposed to thorough review the city charter, then determine whether the charter needs further amendments, prudent or necessary. or that we feel are necessary or appropriate regarding any changes, we should make recommendations. So just be that broad, you know, if someone's got a good idea they want to put forward, or we should change something, just put it forward. That's all. That's not an argument. Thanks for putting ideas forward.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, from my perspective, in the interest of making the city better and making it run better, I think there are many cases where it can be run better if it has a stipulation on it, not like a very expensive one. I think there's like more cases where it's beneficial to have it simpler, but there are also cases where you do want to go into that detail. That's just from my perspective.
I think that the reason Lansing is more extensive is because a lot of people in Lansing come forward and express their concerns. And then in the city's attempt to address those concerns, a lot more has gone into the charter. And that's what we are essentially able to do too, is like, Jeff, you have experienced more than some of us in some of the kind of, real estate issues and that type of thing. This is a chance for you to let us know that so that we can reflect on whether that's an ordinance issue or a charter opportunity. But I mean, we'll leave it better than it was. And I often ask myself, why are we here? What ultimately will this charter mean for the citizens of East Lansing? Do they read it? Will they read it? And I say they will read it more if we are addressing what really the concerns are. And we're, doing our best effort to make it so that it really addresses what they need. And that's why it's good that it's cyclical and we can do it more frequently. So,
And the
build on that.
the good example of that is the accessibility of records. Just a simple thing like that is not any place in the charter now. It'll be very clear from them.
And I've been thinking about this as a city manager, style government. This is our city manager's, job description. Like, these are the decisions. So he has so much, he's so empowered in daily operations, which I'm an operations person, so I like having an individual chart of operations. But these are his guidelines for how he does his job. If we think about it that way, even if no citizens ever read them, these are the handbook for how we want the city to be managed. And that's why I was real concerned with the deputy manager kind of pushback from the city manager, because he has to do what he's told in here in a way. He has so much leeway with all the reporting to him, all these people, but he doesn't really get to question what the charter says in terms of him having to do. That's just my thought about that. And when we think about that high level, we're not micromanaging someone's work, but we are at a high level saying, appointed deputy manager. That's so the charter. If you think about it through those eyes, maybe then that's more important. But
All right, well, let's then move on to get back to where we were left off, and we'll continue to, Jeff, you can put your good ideas, Pam, anybody else on this committee will put them, and we have the discussion, and I kind of feel like we haven't not had discussion. And some things are still out there that we're going to discuss, like what we just did earlier today with what you brought about, projects and stuff.
not everybody's without doing.
And Jonathan, let's go back. Would you say your first 2 cents, Tony wasn't out of the room?
Yeah. So I thought that the writing of this didn't really reflect the way that the rest of the charter reads, where it's more speaking of like policy statements as opposed to commands. So I think it should say the city shall be dedicated to the transparency of its proceedings and records. All public meetings shall be subject to the Michigan Open Meetings Act, and notice consistent therewith shall be posted to City Hall and on the city website. Accessibility to public records shall be governed by FOIA. Public records and all documents for which disclosure is mandated by this charter shall be available during business hours.
And then I heard 2 thoughts of moving the final sentence to either the first sentence or the second sentence.
It makes more sense, given what Pam was saying.
Yeah. So that's what
I was trying to.
I just have a question. When we say city library, do we want to say city library throughout this, or do we want to say the East Lansing Public Library?
It's Lansing.
Because that's what it's known as here. And so that would be in that other one that we've had to get the budget, that East Lansing Public Library. DOT office there.
I'll just ask another question though. In this public I'm not disputing the need to disclose these, but if we move public records and all documents to the second sentence, are we, it says accessibility to public records is governed by FOIA, and then public records for which disclosure is mandated. Are the public records in that sentence, that second sentence, defined by what's available under FOIA? Because there are other public records that aren't available for disclosure, like employees' employment records. So I don't want us to get into a pickle because we're suggesting at the outset. I understand.
Well, that's the definition of public records. That's, I highlighted
I
that.
think what Lynn's trying to say is that if we divorce the FOIA sentence from the public record shall be available sentence, then maybe a judge down the line is going to say, well, the charter has public records first and then later define, and I'm just, this is how,
I'd be
putting on my lawyer brain.
happy to lose the public records. If we said documents identified by this charter as available will be, or public records as identified by this charter, or however we're referring to them, because we do say repeatedly that they're public records.
So you want
But
to
the public records, I'd be happy if, I love the FOIA concern, and that is a real concern, and I'm all for expanding what we're sharing, but my thought was, this is just, in this charter, there's a bunch of references to where documents are, and they're different. Let's make them all the same. Here's our standard for if a record has been deemed to be public. And if it's just deemed in this charter, I'm good with that. It doesn't have to be
And
expanded.
actually, that probably makes more sense because public records include, for example, court files, and there's no reason for the court file to have to be at the city. I think
Right, I'd be happy with public records identified by this charter are available during business hours. Yeah, it was just to, to clean up all those different locations that we had identified
So-
in this document.
Tony, I think what we're discussing is that sentence 2 should read, or what Pam's suggesting is it should read, all documents for which disclosure is mandated by this charter shall be available during business hours.
That's fine. Yeah, I'm happy with that. Yeah.
Yeah, let's just drop public records.
Sure.
Perfect.
Though we do refer to them as
I think-
public. We do, there's many, well, I'll do a search, we're searching, but there is public records are referred to all through this.
Sure.
And so it's as if this is a public record, so this is how it's handled. And maybe that's a bigger question for the city, but.
Also, in the charter, this library is referred to as a city library, so we're gonna change that. Chapter 17. Or does that matter? It doesn't matter for the purpose of this, but.
I think when that comes up, I think that's on my list, is that we identify it as the East Lansing Public Library. Because, if we go to cattle or anything like that would happen, we want to identify where our library is. And would they say that's the city library? Again, we also have people that live in Clinton County. We have people that live in, Meridian Township that have an East Lansing address. So we're just, people have different ways of looking at what city is for them. So I just wanted to make it really clear. I don't know that we call it East Lansing City Hall, we call it City Hall, but if we wanted to do that, I don't have a problem with that either, but this is the East Lansing City Charter, but the library has a very specific name. That would be city. Okay, Tony, you have all that to come back to?
Yes.
So now that we've had all this conversation, this title does imply the public record. Right? So that's right at the title. So we'd be saying public records defined in this document, but we're definitely, right?
You're saying it's just the documents.
Well, but the original is transparency and access to public records.
The FOIA defines public records and also all the records that are disclosure. maybe just overthinking it, like, there's a record that's public, like, not everything's public, there's a bunch of stuff that by law is not.
Right, I mean, you just said, didn't want to use all public records.
I know, it's kind of, take it out of the punch.
Well, I'm just saying, maybe there should be more in this section. Maybe it isn't just referring to these documents, to the charter documents.
Transparency and access to public records and documents, because isn't that what we're talking about?
And so that's why we have the two legal points. That makes sense. I totally, that makes all
The title
sense.
says public.
Yeah.
In sections.
Yeah, yeah,
Public records.
yeah. Yeah. I see that. So it's not just, even though I just had this charter hat on, it is all transparency. That's what it-
Okay.
Transparency and access to public records and documents.
Sure, that's fine.
Moving on then to 4.5, which is continued discussion on 4.7. So I have here, we were holding on this because we were changing to chapter 8. And specifically in 4.7 F. Person shall have access to minutes and permanent journal and records in city council during business hours, and they shall be posted on the city's website. 4.7. Oh, are you on?
Yeah,
So you've got the city's website, so you've got that. Okay, and
Oh, you're looking at the old one, what the Tribune was. I was looking at the one that's right there.
so anybody have any questions about that? Sorry.
No, I'm good.
I got it there.
Maybe we should say signed by the clerk or the clerk's designee, for what we just said earlier. Let's fix that right now.
To change the title.
You don't have to find it later.
All right, with those two changes, are we okay on 4.7? We need a motion to approve it with those,
I would move.
just for, moved by Foreman, seconded by Johnson.
It's in the. Is the.
Yes, or the clerk's designee.
You said it.
Okay, so,
Seven
okay,
from what we had. Okay,
we had two changes plus the little.
gotcha.
Okay, so you're okay with that? All right.
Any of those?
So the red is one change that's highlighted there. The second one is, that was in the print, but up here on the second paragraph under F, when it's, and their designee, we're gonna put, and the clerk's designee. All right, any more discussion on that? Okay, all in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. Okay. 4.7 is approved with those changes. Next, we're discussion on proposed changes to 6.5.
This was deletion of 6.5 as a result of the adoption. What's the chapter 8?
So should we set that to the side until we take it off termination on chapter 8?
I would think so.
Yeah, maybe the list, those items, are they, These are specifically identified documents.
I think that they're, I think for my initial thought on that is we're trying to keep section 8 as simple as possible
But
and
we're,
adding a list of things to say.
but we're losing a list of things. So where, how would we know what is expected to be public documents beyond what is clearly articulated in this charter? Then also the Freedom of Information Act, which apparently has some dates in it, but with agendas and attachments. But then also these things are separate from that. These are their own list of entities.
Yeah, because if you're trying to convince the voters you're getting rid of this section, you're passing another section that covers it. So.
Because they're not finding this document, and they're not specific FOIA covered items, I presume.
So let me just ask you really quick, if you put a new chapter into the charter, so chapter 8 is new, and you had section 8.1 and section 8.2, is that one valid question or is that?
8.1 and 8, that section would be one valid.
8.1 and 8.2, they're both new, it's a whole new chapter.
But it's the same topic, so we could do that through one valid question.
Entire chat, yeah, 8.5.
Section 8.
That could be a single question. All the chapter could be a single question.
Yes,
Okay,
so long as it covers one topic, so it's a little bit specific, but yeah.
so do you want to go back then to 8.1 and have a separate 8.2 or something that lists these documents? That will be okay.
You can just include it in the sentence.
All documents.
Disclosures pending, such as, but not 3 or 4 records.
I think there are quite a few references, but if we want to do that, then let's just jam it at the end because we don't know if we're going to make other documents mandated as we move through this.
So,
And then we'd also just hold off on this right now.
so 6.5, 8, chapter 8, we're just going to keep on hold for right now and
Yeah.
just,
To review after
Well, and
we determine there are changes.
right, and if these are articulating copies of the charter, the ordinances, codes, copies, jumping through, city manager members. Yeah, this seems unnecessary, and then it's, yeah, so. But it's the codes, it's just, that's the only new one, right, that you're not. Codes
Codes and resolutions.
must be made, but our resolution's part of agendas and they're all.
but they're all mixed up. You know,
Yeah,
there's a
they're-
resolution, 2 months from the previous one. I think that when you talk about putting it on the ballot and say we're getting rid of this, I actually think that the community would say, oh, you're talking about access to records, here's where I can get code, here's where I can read resolutions and all of that.
Right.
And we're eliminating this thing. I think you would have a better chance of passing it versus someone saying, and then it's listed that way too. It's a header. So I think you're right. We'll hold this and see if anything else should be added to this
Do it, yeah.
for a record. All right, then moving on to 4.7.
And just on those issues, just to like the ballot question would typically say, if it explained chapter 8, it would also say this will remove or replace all your other sections related to access to records, something along those lines. And we may be able to do that so that removal of 6.5 wouldn't be another ballot question. That kind of gets into the weeds of it, and I think we should still pass these like this so that the city council gets everything to see thoughts of council, but then we can figure out like, how to discuss it.
Okay.
If they vote to remove and not add.
Yeah, that's
And of course, very unlikely.
I understand that.
Yeah, but and that's why I think it makes sense when we look at these to make sure there's an explanation that is the reason for suggesting.
Okay, so, we have section 4.9.
But there were 3 references to officer and requesters that we added administrative for officer.
Any concerns about that?
I think I'm opposed to this change. I mean, I know the recommendation came from Mark at the last meeting. I think based on what he believed his understanding to be at the time that, that the provision was passed to mean that that council members could request information from employees or from, the higher up officials that are not technically employees. And I think that the conversation we had last time kind of illuminated that there has to be a way for council, if there's a misbehaving council member and who's not being forthcoming about that misbehavior, there has to be a body who's able to investigate. And I don't think there's a better body to investigate than the council itself. And I understand Mark's concerns, but those concerns have, the fears that he had haven't occurred over the last 30 years since the provision or since this became part of the charter. And I don't see a need to change it if it's not broken. Because I think that it would be a bad situation if we end up in a position where there is a misbehaving council member who their misbehavior can't be brought to light because there's no mechanism to do it. And I think that having this provision allows a mechanism for that to happen. So I actually don't think we should adopt this change at all.
Great. Also, I do think you brought this up last time, was why are we getting the employee in the city with misconduct in office? Which also, there is no misconduct in office for an administrative officer.
And something that Mark brought up, but something Mark brought up is that it's a felony misconduct in office, but the problem is the city can't make something done. The city can only announce, by ordinance and under the Home Rule Act, the city can only announce misdemeanors. So the city cannot say that a certain action is a felony under the city charter. So the way it's written right now, it hits employees. It does hit employees harder than it hits other officers or administrative officers. And I think that
Unless you get the prosecutor charged.
no, because the city does not have the authority to announce something, to promulgate something that carries felony charges.
No, so you can't do anything.
Interesting. So yeah,
Felonies are just defined by state. That's
Right.
Criminal.
Well, there's no city ordinance covering misconduct in office. The ethics code, which is around, doesn't mention misconduct in office. So, yeah, what is misconduct in office for an administrative officer? Still meaningless.
right.
Punishment. You're elected officer. If you're in office. So somehow we got to fill in the gap of what happens to an administrative officer. And then is it fair for an employee to be there? City clerk or, I don't know, city manager, someone to just get termination. Is that in the city? Is that in the contract with city manager? It's got an office, or is it attorney or any other city officer? Probably not.
Well, there are certain circumstances where severance is under the city manager's contract, for example. I can be fired for any reason whatsoever. With him, there's severance with exceptions, and one of them in the contract, I believe, is misconduct in office.
Uses that terminology.
That's my recollection. I'd have to pull it up, but
Can we see that? Those public documents?
oh yeah, yeah, it's on the website, I'm sure.
Even still, I think that we should fill the gap. If we're gonna say that, the lowest person working at City Hall is committing a misdemeanor by doing something, but their boss is only committing a fireable offense, that seems inequitable.
Well, and I think it's worse than that because this is a scenario when you're being asked a question by a council person and you're not answering. So if that's my manager's problem, right? Like, but I'm just a staff person. How am I called? Am I being subpoenaed? Like, how is this
No,
not?
this is only in reference to subpoenas.
Okay, so this is by being subpoenaed, but.
Right.
Some of your state things. Show up in this. Like.
How about failure on the part of any employee or administrative office? And then get rid of that last sentence.
Yeah, that makes more sense. But you still have to somehow define misconduct in office. Like if you're a low-level employee, misconduct in office, terminated.
What we're getting rid of
Yes.
that sentence.
I think we're getting rid of,
We're getting rid of that sentence.
so I think what,
Last sentence.
I think what
No.
Joe is recommending is failure on the part of any administrative officer or employee in the city to obey the subpoena or to produce books, papers, and other evidence pursuant to the subpoena shall constitute a misdemeanor.
Not keep it a crime for any of those things to happen.
Read that again.
No matter, yeah.
Failure on the part.
Yeah, so
You're keeping administrative officer there.
We're taking out administrative.
No, we're gonna say,
keeping administrative officer there because
The employee and administrative.
no, I think we keep it as officer there.
Yeah, we have to keep it as officer.
Then city council members.
Or if
You
you
want
want
to-
to say
yeah,
city council members.
Failure. failure on the part of any administrative officer or employee of the city to obey the subpoena or produce papers, blah, 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 pursuant shall constitute a misdemeanor.
I agree, except I think it should be all officers, not just administrative officers.
We're dropping administrative there in those three places.
Elected officer would be subject to misconduct in office. Officers subject to a subpoena.
What the subpoena brings to light.
Tony, you have other comparative references, from other cities, like they make this a misdemeanor.
We really have to look at, these things, and these are always an important section. You have to have a hammer in case you get to that situation. Thankfully, I haven't been in a city in that situation.
Just curious.
Alex, yeah, okay.
What other places to do?
They haven't used the hammer.
I think that does what Mark was trying to get to.
It still allows
You
them.
remove the other two administrative amendments off the first two officers.
Which includes both officers, council officers and administrative officers.
So this, let me just, so we have this correct. The council or any council member may request information on any employee or officer of the city regarding the conduct of any department, office, or officer of the city, period. Council may make investigations as to municipal affairs. For that purpose, may subpoena witnesses, administer oaths, and compel the production of books, papers, and other evidence. Failure on the part of any officer of the city to obey the subpoena and produce books, papers, and other evidence pursuant to the subpoena shall constitute a misdemeanor.
That it should be employee, officer, or employee. Or failure on the part of any employer, employee, or officer.
In that last sentence.
One thing I think we should consider, and I think Jeff, your email earlier today referenced this, is that maybe at the end of that first sentence, after officer of the city, we should include related to municipal affairs. So that we aren't subjecting our city employees and our city council members to things in their personal lives.
That's related to city.
Yeah.
So when you don't
Is
do
it related
The
to,
municipal affairs.
second sentence, as the same city or sheriff has to municipal affairs. So what about when you just don't define what a misdemeanor is? Do we need, is it?
A misdemeanor
Have an
is-
Ordinance?
A misdemeanor under these ordinance, under the city code is, if there's no penalty, definition is just default to 90 days fine.
Days by now. So anything in the charter, which I think use that too. That's $500 fine or 90 days.
Okay, then we're comfortable with that, then we move forward.
I'd like to see a mock. Of
Yes,
or- yeah.
Marches, yeah.
Well, I think when it comes for the next packet, we'll have that discussion of how we evolve to that, so that, or you can watch the tape. Okay, so we left off at continue the session of 6.6 is the next thing. And we are almost at 9 o'clock here, so let's just go to 6.6 and see where we're at with that. And then we have 7.6, and see if we come to. This is periodic review of the code of the city of East Lansing. Now, back in 2013, a memo went out from the city attorney that said it was the bicentennial review of the charter time, the code time. Huh? That is,
It's like only yesterday.
bicentennial, sorry. Yeah, I guess that would be wrong. So that was August 16th. Tom Yaden sent that out to 2013. And how about if you, rather than getting to the conversation at this point, this will be in the packet for next time, and then we can do that right before this. Sorry, I took that away from the advisory. And then we can talk about that at that point. So let's go to 7.6, just see where we're at with that one. This was our city attorney. I don't think we ever went further than the city attorney. I think we were still at the city attorney when we called it last time at the end of the year. So let's start on doing 6.6, 7.6, and seven, and the rest of 7, because we never got to the ethics and nepotism, and we did have that comment. So let's label this continued discussion on chapter 7, and the other one will be continued discussion of section 6.6. So we'll put those two on there, and we'll have that extra. And then where we're at tonight, we did pass. We did go through 2. That's 2 approvals on that, and we did chapter 10. So we are on target here to do chapter 11 and 12. Is there anybody else that you want? That was very helpful to have Owen here. Is there anybody that you think that you want for this? So again, to you, Jill, is there somebody that would be helpful to have here for when we start to vote 11, 12?
Got it. We can't touch something without somebody knows law. I can't imagine anything here will change, but
Assessor or somebody?
yeah, it's that's.
Okay, so how about, if he can't come, we'll postpone that. We,
Well, maybe just ask him, is there anything in here that you think needs to be addressed?
It'd be nice to get, if there is, also to get that in writing ahead of time. It'd be nice to see this in writing ahead of time today, or just back to us.
so is Asia, that's something you can ask as the city assessor, Mr. Bellman, to look at the next 2 chapters. If there's any concerns or proposals looking at that they put in writing, and the city assessor can state at kind of time for any questions. We put that, like we did today with new business, where we took the new one, then they can leave and we can go back over our old stuff. Does that make sense?
Ask the chief financial officer to come discuss well. Same thing, just ask if you have any comments.
But look ahead to chapter 13, where it's, the assessment rules and it's, special assessment. Seems like we should try to put that one in there too,
We discussed.
for discussion. So when you post what our agenda is, will you put chapter 13 on there? I'm sure we're probably, it's supposed to be for the following meeting. But that makes sense to put it there.
And I, so much state law stuff here, I know.
It will be that hard to get. That makes sense?
Yeah, I can have those staff members submit any proposals they might have, like the Monday before the meeting, and I can update the communications packet the Monday before. Is that
Okay.
enough time? The agenda goes out on Friday.
Okay. And, you know, I guess we don't have a lot on this. Well-
Again, I would be shocked if anything 11.
It's just all of them.
Even, even changing them. Word might seem to happen. But I would love it. Exactly.
All right, and then we're just gonna find out, we're just gonna double check on that House Bill 5700 to see whether it went through or not.
And if it did, then we'll add it as.
I actually with your.
That's what legislative website says.
Yeah.
Okay, so then we're okay with meeting what we've approved so far with that. Which was the first meeting. Okay, well, 9:05, pretty good. We're on target, so thank you all. And, we're back for this year.
You,
Need a motion to adjourn.
Yes, we do.
We adjourn.
Linda's moving to adjourn, and Jonathan and Veronica, and probably everyone else is. Say aye. I'll close and sign. Oh, it was the art. Right?